Welcome back to Alberta Primetime. Tax season is weeks away, but our Monday Money panel already has a list of changes and some new receipts you may want to start keeping in 2012. For next year, Jane Alm is an investment advisor with Angus Watt Advisory and National Bank Financial. Beth Hamilton-Keene is a director and portfolio manager at Moore Investment Management in Calgary. And Shafik Hirani is director and senior executive financial advisor with Investors Group. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Hello.
Good evening.
Beth, Albertans have likely begun receiving their 2011 tax returns in the mail, but there are a few changes on the books. Well, both years, really. Take us through what you think we should be perhaps thinking about.
Well, certainly one of the more recent announcements was with regards to your moving expenses. So if you're contemplating a move this coming year, there's now a new interpretation of the definition of a relocation for work purposes that allows you to perhaps claim a move that you may not have thought you could before. So definitely keep an eye on that and consult your personal tax advisor for guidance on that. And the traditional, it's more, I think, about keeping the right habits during the year to be prepared and have a smoother tax time. And that's put away those child fitness tax credit enrollment forms for when you're registering your children for their various programs, put away those bus transit passes where you're eligible, and just kind of keep your files going and current, and that way it'll make it a lot easier come 2012 filing time.
Shafik?
The moving expense credit is a new one and very interesting. On the other side, you know, the main season we're in right now is RSP season. So, you know, the main tax deduction people generally take advantage of is the RSPs. The challenging thing about RSPs is you have until the end of February to contribute, and people generally don't get their T4s until March. So it makes the timing a little bit difficult. And secondly, capital losses can be carried backwards 3 years and forward indefinitely. So if you have a capital gain as the markets recover from 2008, 2009, 2010 were good years, then you can actually deduct or offset these gains this year against losses last year. And a lot of people forget that. That's an important one.
Jane, you're watching deadlines too.
We're watching deadlines. You have until February 29th to do that RSP contribution. That's if you're trying to use it for the 2011 tax year. And as Shafik said, you know, you might have your tax assessment from last year, which will tell you how much you can put in for 2011. You won't have your T4s from this year, so you don't know your amount for 2012. One other thing that we like to remind people is you're going to be getting a lot of envelopes from your investments, from your advisor, as well as from your mutual fund companies. They contain T3s and T5s, so make sure you open them, make sure you put them in your tax file, as Beth said, so that they're prepared. And before you take everything to your accountant, you might want to contact your advisor and say, this is what I've received. Is there anything else that I need? One other thing that we have to remember that's changed this year is we had the change from trusts, income trusts, over to corporations. So all those companies now are paying dividends, so they'll come as a T5. That should speed up your tax filing, with the exception of real estate investment trusts, REITs. Those will still not be out until the end of March. So you want to make sure you have all of those before you go to your accountant.
All right, good advice. Shafik, let's turn to the December inflation numbers that come out this Friday. What are you expecting, and how do you think it might affect us here in Alberta?
Well, you know, inflation's been all over the map this year. It's ranged from as high as 3% to as low as 1%. Mark Carney's giving a speech tomorrow on monetary policy, and the Bank of Canada, they target a 2% inflation rate. I'm suspecting that the inflation numbers will be in that range. However, I'm surprised that we haven't hit a period of stagflation or even higher inflation in the United States and Europe, because all of this printing of cash that is been happening across the central banks across the world, this should lead to a period of inflation, and not only just inflation, but I'm worried about stagflation, where there's a period of low economic growth and high unemployment. So there's some inflation concerns. It's not as bad in Canada, but I would suspect it to rise pretty soon.
Beth, some financial experts are warning that government debt might see inflation at or above 5%. Do you want to talk about that?
Certainly, the worry there is really the cost of the debt, and really, just like any of us, the government is going to be faced with the same problems. As interest rates begin to go up as a way to curb or manage inflation going forward, you'll see the cost of servicing that debt go up, just as we would on a personal and a household level.
Sure.
We'll see that at the government level. And of course, going through this period of time with all the quantitative easing that's been kind of injected into the economy, that debt, that burden, the cost of that injection is really what the governments are carrying. And that's what the worry is going forward, is how will they be able to service that debt? They'll be faced with that same threat going forward. Now, to me, inflation also is a very personal thing. And despite the fact that we get these numbers out on a monthly basis, looking back, what was the rate of inflation and so forth, you really need to look at, for an individual, what that inflationary pressure is doing to you. So if a lot of your budget is food inflation has been much higher than the core inflation numbers. And of course, going forward, and particularly those that are seniors and living in assisted living places, and rates of inflation there are in the 10 to 15% range. So inflation becomes very personal and a lot more about what you're spending your money on, and not as generic as the numbers we hear in the headlines.
So, Jane, are you seeing Alberta clients coming to you and really needing to adjust things on a personal level, just as Jane's talking about?
Yeah, just as Beth is saying, what we're getting is a lot of people saying, well, you know, we see that the inflation is 2-3%, but it sure doesn't feel like it. We have to understand that those numbers are a national number, and we have regional inflation, as well as Beth pointed out, personal things. What are you spending money on? But in Alberta, there are some things that cost more than they do in other parts of the world. So our other parts of the country, rather. So our inflation here will be different than the inflation in Newfoundland or in Quebec or somewhere else. But, you know, we have to focus on what are we spending our money on, how fast is it getting up, and if we have a fixed income, and not just the people on that are seniors and on those, quote, fixed incomes, but anybody on a salary is truly on a fixed income if they're not getting a raise every year.
Right. And a lot of people perhaps aren't. Shafik, Alberta real estate values are set to rise, but not as much as inflation, perhaps. What does that mean for the average Albertan?
I think it's huge, and I think this is a very important point you brought up, Jennifer. See, if inflation does rise, it does affect us, and what people have to do is they have to adjust their portfolios accordingly. Now, if inflation goes up, the way to combat inflation is for the Bank of Canada to increase interest rates. If they increase interest rates, then the affordability of new home buyers and people looking to refinance goes down. And if it goes down, then the supply, the inventory and the demand for real estate goes down, which means downward pressure on the real estate market, which causes that inflationary boom to go down. So even if Alberta real estate is expected to go up in the short term, I think long term there are some adverse effects on the Alberta real estate market.
Well, when we come back, we want to talk about Eurozone downgrades. What does the loss of AAA credit ratings there mean here? Welcome back to Alberta Primetime and the Monday Money Panel. Alberta and Europe are not that far apart when credit rating downgrades are taking place now on the other continent. Jane, this has been a threat for a while, but now France officially downgraded, 9 in all. What kind of an impact are we seeing here?
Well, we didn't see a lot of impact. There was a lot of discussion. We've had a lot of warning that they were likely going to be downgraded. They were downgraded by Standard & Poor's, France was, as well as 8 other countries. Moody's came out today and said, okay, guys, you got to get your stuff together, but we're not downgrading you right now, effectively. So we've got one agency of 3 that has said you're downgraded. So it's not a major effect as far as the yields today, but it puts some pressure on the European Stabilization Fund, which is the fund that's going to be used to support all these nations as they go through this. And they need to be able to raise money. Back to Beth's point and Shafik's point, when a government has to raise money and they have to pay a higher interest rate, same as you or I, it becomes very expensive and it becomes very hard to maintain.
Beth, what are you watching this week in terms of how that Eurozone credit rating is affecting Albertans?
Well, the story's not brand new, that's for sure. And as Jane mentioned, a lot of the credit downgrading has already been factored in and priced in, so that wasn't a surprise. What we're watching now is just kind of the frustration, I think, that the market is showing with respect to the gridlock, the political issues, and just the inability to kind of get through this and so forth. And of course, Greek is back in the front right now in terms of the Greek markets, back in the front, talking about their inability to negotiate. And the real worry there is the renegotiating of the debt for the end of March, and the threat being if they can't get it figured out, there may be an actual default.
Shafik, how does what we're seeing in Europe compare to the U.S. credit rating downgrade in terms of its impact on the Alberta economy, the global economy as well?
The impact on the Alberta economy is significantly higher with the U.S. downgrade than it is euro. Like, the reason the Canadian markets are down isn't really a factor of how much trade we do with Europe, which is very minimal. The U.S. is significantly higher, and the U.S. had a $15 trillion deficit, which caused the downgrade. The problem, and Jane sort of alluded to this on the three rating agencies, Fitch, S&P. These credit agencies have all lost a lot of credibility. I mean, they rated AAA, the U.S. AAA rated. They're rating all these countries AAA ratings, and a lot of people are saying, well, how on earth could you justify a AAA rating on a debt of that magnitude? So, you know, the credibility of these agencies is really minimal. But you did see a decline in the euro when France was downgraded last week. So,
and if you weren't watching your portfolios, if you were asleep at the switch, you may have gotten caught. Hopefully not. Jane, China also worth a mention. What are you seeing there?
Well, China, we're watching the inflation. Now, their inflation number came in around 8.7%, which is still. People would say, well, oh, that's slower. Still, 8.7% is pretty good growth. For China, they need to maintain an inflation rate of around 7 to 8% to keep their civilians and their economy growing, so keep away from that unrest. And the last thing that they want as a nation would be any kind of unrest. So we're watching to see if they can engineer a soft landing, make sure that they stay above those numbers, and make sure that the economy continues to grow.
China more important for Alberta than Europe.
China, definitely.
Beth, and Shafik, we've got some key indicators closer to home coming out this week as well. Do you have time to quickly touch on those?
Sure. The main indicator coming out this week is Tuesday and Thursday. There's the economic policy on monetary policy, and they're going to give some indication about what the Bank of Canada tends to do with monetary policy. Then on Friday, the manufacturing services index is out, and that's an important one because the manufacturing numbers are a leading economic indicator, not like GDP, which is a lagging indicator. So it's a good indication of which way the markets are going to go domestically, at least.
Okay, Beth, final word to you tonight. What are you watching?
Well, the continued watching of Europe will continue, I think, to be the pastime of most of those market players out there. And of course, we continue to see incremental improvements pointing towards that tepid recovery out of the United States. That's somewhat positive that we're looking for.
All right. Thank you all for your time tonight. Jane Alm is an investment advisor with Angus Watt Advisory and National Bank Financial. Beth Hamilton-Keene is a director and portfolio manager at Moore Investment Management in Calgary. And Shafik Hirani, director and senior executive financial advisor with Investors Group.